Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar and panel on our newly released atlas, an atlas of natural gas power with carbon capture and storage in the United States. My name is Emma Tomley, and I'm a state and regional policy specialist on the Great Plains Institute's Industrial Innovation and Carbon Management team. The Great Plains Institute, for any of you who don't know us, is a nonpartisan nonprofit with a mission to accelerate the transition to net zero carbon emissions for the benefit of people, the economy, and the environment. Before we get started today, I'll briefly walk through what we're planning to cover. We're going to begin with an overview of the atlas, including background on why natural gas power with CCS matters, what the analysis is designed to do, how it was conducted, and what we found, along with any key takeaways or limitations that the authors considered. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to the authors of the Atlas, Ryan Kammer, our research manager with the Industrial Innovation and Carbon Management team at GPI, and Sangeet Nepal, our technology specialist with the Carbon Capture Coalition. So with that, Ryan and Sangeet, I'll hand it on over to you.
Thanks, Emma. Um, Thanks for the great introduction and great to see a lot of folks joining up for the webinar. Just a quick background on why did we think that natural gas plus CCS Atlas is going to be a important resource. Rationale was that we did see a stagnant electricity use over the last 2 decades. However, things are changing rapidly. We do see a lot of forecast studies and estimations showcasing that the US electricity demand is projected to grow by 35 to 50% by 2040. And a lot of those credit goes to the AI-driven data centers that may use or could use almost up to 1,000 terawatt hours of electricity by 2030. And then if you can go to the next slide, we will talk about why is the natural gas plus CCS really significant in this matter. So obviously with the growth projected in the electricity use and electricity demand in the US, the question really is centered around the firm capacity. And if you look at the bottom bar chart, you would see that by 2030, about 80 gigawatts of um, um, you know firm capacity power is going to be deficit. So we do need dispatchable and reliable power sources to really operate these data centers without interruptions 24/7. So the energy sources like natural gas combined cycle is going to play a significant role in providing dispatchable power. If we can go to the next slide, I would be happy to showcase why natural gas plus CCS really matters. Obviously, it's crystal clear that the 40% of the US electricity used today, it comes from natural power facilities. And as of today, more than 30 gigawatts of new gas capacity is planned by 2030. So obviously, um, these natural gas power facilities are largely unabated as of today. However, we do need a decarbonized firm power to mitigate the um, climate change and meet our climate goals. What does the natural gas plus CCS really provides is really it really provides a synergy between the reliability and scalability and low emissions carbon, and it could be easily deployed on new build on retrofit. So it really stands out as one of the most significant or easily usable, dispatchable, and clean energy source. If we can go to the next slide, um, I can really showcase. So, what does the atlas really do? So, with all that background information on energy, energy use projections and why and how is natural gas plus CCS facility really significant? What we're trying to do with this particular atlas is we're trying to provide a national screening tool, meaning that we're trying to showcase on a national level where in the United States does it make the most sense to build a new build natural gas plus CCS facility or existing natural gas power generation plant. So into the both new build and retrofit opportunities, and we take into account multiple key factors like energy infrastructure, meaning proximity to the transmission lines, proximity to the natural gas pipelines, proximity to the geologic CO2 stores, and proximity to favorable land and water and other factors. If you can go to the next slide here. Obviously, there are three different scenarios we run in trying to come up with different situations and permutations and combinations. So first one is the baseline scenario where we assign scores for different factors in a balance approach. But for storage scenario, we heavily rely on prioritizing the proximity to the CO2 storage, as well as center co-location scenario. We heavily prioritize proximity to the lines. One more thing that I wanted to add is this Atlas. It really assesses the suitability at a 500 meter by 500 meter grid scales across the country. And as a result of the Atlas, it provides us the reasons for deployment and informs any project development, investment, and policy decisions surrounding around deployment of natural gas plus CCS facility. On to the next slide. I will pass it to Ryan um, on touching base on what is the methodology and how do we come up with those results.
Yeah. Thanks, Sangeet. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We're excited to be able to share this report with you and discuss kind of both the opportunities it presents, but also a little bit about the challenges and where do we go from here. As Sangeet mentioned, we are looking nationally, specifically in the contiguous United States, around where the opportunities for natural gas with CCS exist, looking primarily at a variety of categories or criteria that are important for building these facilities. So I've categorized them here in four ways. The atlas itself will dive into these individually and discuss kind of why they're important, and then also individually provide maps around where they are present and how we kind of score our various criteria. The remaining slides here will be focused on the result slides, but I wanted to kind of walk through here first what we included. So as Sangeet mentioned, we kind of categorize into four areas: land considerations, things that are going to be specific to the facility location, largely things like the type of land that you might be building on. Certain types of land are easier to build on than others. It's much easier to convert barren land into a facility than something that might be already possibly developed. Things like the slope and proximity to faulting and other earthquake hazards, things that you're going to be considering from an engineering standpoint, what you're going to need to build the facility, how it's going to impact both the cost, but also the design, and also just if it's even suitable to begin with. And then other things that are important as you kind of start building out are things like access to ways to actually build the facility, things like interstates, railroads, and ports. You need to be near at least one of those if you're going to be bringing in large equipment to build these facilities. As well as just the access to things like, are you near urban areas? Certainly high development, looking at certain locations that have already been heavily developed might be challenging, but are you going to be near an area that is both suitable for and looking for advancing power? And then as we dive into the data center specifically, things that might be considered specifically for data centers like low latency to large populations. For things like pipelines and transmission, certainly, if you're building a new facility, it's a lot cheaper to be able to build it near existing infrastructure that you can gain access to. And so things like transmission lines, natural gas pipelines, as well as CO2 pipelines, though more limited in scope, they are still something that would be important to be proximal to if it's an opportunity. Access to water, certainly we're seeing changes and advancements in how much water is needed for power plants and activities around carbon capture. And so how much they are important varied by scenario, but you still want to be present near them, most likely, and also considering things like the Service Water Supply Use Index is a value from the USGS that assesses the water scarcity potential, or how much of the water that is being supplied to the region or the area is currently already being utilized. And so being cognizant of that as we build out facilities to make sure that we are looking at areas that wouldn't already potentially be stressed by water to build these new facilities. Last, and in many ways, opposite of not least, more one of the most important, is if you're looking at natural gas with CCS, you need to have access very likely to geologic storage. There's certainly opportunities for developing a CO2 utilization opportunities, but for the most part, we are looking at large scale storage and saline storage opportunities as well as oil and gas fields. Once we categorized and classified each of these individually, we scored them individually. We then would combine them. It's kind of what the graphic here is showing. We have a combination of those in a way. Each of these is weighted individually differently. So each scenario will kind of prioritize different aspects of the project. The atlas itself will really dive into that deep. I'll kind of highlight some of those differences across our results here. But as you can kind of see, the thicknesses here are kind of representing how these are different. These different categories might be overall weighted differently. And then each individual one, once we've classified, once we've weighted them, we then bring them all together and say, okay, for each of those grid cells of those 500 meter by 500 meter locations that Sangeet mentioned, how does everything stack up together, and what does it look like as far as is it a suitable location or not? Does it have all of these characteristics, specifically these characteristics in a way that is suitable for a facility, or does it not? And so that's kind of what our results are showing. So you can go to the next slide. And so first, as Sangeet mentioned, we have this baseline scenario. This, in both our literature review as we develop this, but also engaging with developers and understanding kind of what are the important aspects for developing a new facility. You can think of the baseline scenario as kind of our best assessment or our best guess around how important these various categories and topics are, if all things are equal. So if you're not necessarily focused on a specific aspect, as we'll dive into for other scenarios, generally speaking, we're weighting these different categories differently. So in this case, access to transmission lines, access to natural gas pipelines that already exist, as well as access to suitable saline storage are the most important. And what we can see here, especially for those that are maybe familiar with carbon capture and storage as a technology and the assessments that have been done prior to this project, a lot of the suitable locations, the blues here, both the light blue and the dark blue, align pretty well with areas that we've identified as having suitable geologic storage. Certainly these areas also, what we're indicating is it's not every single geologic basin, but specifically those that have both storage, but then are also have that access to transmission lines that are existing, as well as natural gas pipelines, as well as the variety of categories that you're seeing or you'll see throughout the report and what I described in the last slide. By and large, the areas that have the highest density of these high suitability locations, they're the locations that across the board met the high bar of the various categories individually. Once you add them together, those kind of become the high suitability locations. Those are by and large in West Texas and Oklahoma. We do have some pockets in the Midwest, specifically kind of along the border of Indiana and Illinois, as well as along the Gulf Coast. We'll see some other pockets pop up in the other scenarios as well, but the Mountain West, parts of California and North Dakota also have some opportunities as well. But really, you can kind of see some of those areas that have both historic oil and gas production, meaning they have the geologic characteristics likely present for suitable saline storage as well, are kind of the key areas that were identified. Next slide. And as you're doing that, I will kind of reiterate that these here are specifically for new builds. So we're looking at the criteria involved for both building the facility as well as the carbon capture and storage parts. As we shift now to storage scenarios here, we're not quite as focused on looking at existing transmission lines. They're certainly going to still be important, but here we're much more focused on, do we have suitable storage, whether that is with saline storage or oil and gas fields for permanent storage through things like enhanced oil recovery. Do we have access to those? And are they present in these regions? Again, you'll see that there's still a lot of similarity from what we saw before. If you weren't looking at them side by side, you would say, oh, those look almost identical. But what we do see is specifically in the high suitability, we see kind of an expansion within those basins that have the high suitability for geologic storage, particularly West Texas, Oklahoma, again in the Gulf Coast, maybe more concentrated in kind of Louisiana, Mississippi area, and then a little bit more in the Midwest. Now, as we maybe start having less of an importance of things like existing transmission lines, this is where the Mountain West does start to increase further. Certainly, we want to ensure that once you are building, you are now considering how you can gain access to transmission lines to provide this power to the grid and to customers. But it does show that kind of some of these areas provide opportunities as you start looking specifically at that storage side. If we're looking, we want to build a facility and we want to make sure that we can lower our costs around storage as much as we can. The Mountain West now becomes one of those viable areas. You can also see overall there is an increase in the moderately high and high suitability total area across the region. We evaluated those the same across the different scenarios, and so we see kind of as you expand the importance of storage, it actually even though you're refining what you are necessarily considering as what you need for high suitability, it actually expands your high suitability regions. Let's move on now to the final new build scenario, which is the data center scenario. In this case, we again kind of lower the importance of things like access to transmission lines. Storage is important. The two areas that now become more important here for data centers are proximity to high population centers. These in our scenarios are populations of at least 100,000 people within an area. This is important, as I mentioned earlier, around things like low latency as for data centers. If they're providing something that's going to be related to things like health related things with hospitals or banking and financials, other things that they need a really low latency. They need to have that data and they need to have it quick. They want to make sure that they can communicate with the data centers very quickly. Being near a urban area can provide that to a large customer base, and so that's one of the areas that becomes more important here. Another thing that we learned kind of through this process and decided in the data center scenario that it would be something that is of higher priority is water. Access to water is an important aspect, both from a engineering standpoint, what you're designing. There is an aspect to it around cooling specifically for all three categories for the data centers, for the natural gas power and for the carbon capture and storage. But much more importantly in this area, it's not only from the engineering side, which there are, as I mentioned earlier, some hybrid and air cooling is changing what we might need. But when we're thinking of this from maybe a social license to build or kind of identifying how communities will buy into some of these projects, the difference between maybe what the facility is going to need and what the public and what the communities are looking and thinking that the project will require, even if there's a difference in what's actually going to be used there, it's still important to recognize the importance of water, I think, in all of our communities, and to ensure that areas that are already being challenged with their water supplies don't have this additional view that there's going to be additional constraints on their water from these facilities. And so we identified that as one of the priorities here, and that's kind of where you can kind of see some of these aggregations within these areas. An interesting note here, as we do identify, and this is the last thing I'll say, as we identify the opportunities around being near urban areas, we start to see kind of that East Coast and Pennsylvania, Ohio areas now have an increased suitability as well. So with that, I'll pass it back to Sangeet to talk about our retrofits.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, so like Ryan just mentioned, we did do analysis on not just the new build scenario with sub-scenarios focused on storage, data center, that Ryan just mentioned, but we also did a analysis on retrofit scenario. We specifically assessed the suitability of the locations of 311 existing natural gas combined cycle facilities. We had a threshold of 500 megawatt. So any natural gas combined cycle facilities with at least a 500 megawatt or larger nameplate capacity was part of our analysis. And when we sort of did the analysis, obviously, because this was a retrofit scenario, we prioritized on proximity to the geologic storage in saline and oil and gas fields, and as well as proximity to surface water supply use. So with all that, we found that out of the 11 natural gas combined cycle facilities, 53 of them were present in the high suitability areas in the retrofit scenario. So when we look at these high retrofit opportunities, it's sort of like appear similar, or they appear across the same reasons identified in other scenarios that we did in new build scenarios. So, however, we did see a notable increase in the moderate suitability if you look into the Ohio and Pennsylvania region. Um, but yeah, really consistent results across all scenarios when we compare with the retrofit scenario. If we can go to the next slide. Um, so the main takeaway of the Natural Gas Plus CCS Atlas, the project that we did and explained just now, is that the Gulf Coast, West Texas, Oklahoma region, and the Midwest region, they consistently emerge as the top suitable location for natural gas plus CCS deployment, be it in the new build. And as well as this infrastructure per stores alignments seem really critical, meaning that it is really important for these facilities or potential locations to be in proximity to transmission lines, CO2 pipelines, natural gas pipelines, and geologic storage. Um, and yeah, so both of these pathways, this new build and retrofit, are possible. And the result of our study shows that there is a large contiguous suitability reasons and zones in for the new build scenario, as well as, like I mentioned, more than 50 plus existing natural gas combined cycle have or are well positioned to be retrofitted with carbon capture equipments to support the deployment of natural gas plus CCS plant in supplying demand to the astronomical growth in the US that we talked about. If you can go to the next slide, I will be talking about the key constraints and limitations. Obviously, like we mentioned before, this is more so like a national level screening framework, so it's not a substitute for site-specific feasibility and permitting, and as well as our analysis is focused on 500 meter by 500 meter grid resolution. So a lot of these data sets are approximated and obviously there are rooms to improve. And if our grid resolution is even smaller than that, obviously the results can be more fine-tuned. Also to mention that some of the major factors like community engagement, permitting and regulatory factors and project level economic and financing conditions, those are not included on this project, or I would say not fully captured. And so obviously there's always room to increase or room to include those factors moving forward as the results depend on scenarios. Um, so with that, thanks for your time and listening to us. Now I'll pass it back to Emma for trans to the panel discussion.
Thanks, Sangeet. And thank you, Ryan and Sangeet, both for walking us through the analysis and opportunities and limitations. I think that framing of where the strongest opportunities exist is a really helpful foundation for this next discussion. And we're now shifting into the panel portion of the webinar to dig a little bit deeper into what those findings mean for deployment, market development, and policy. And so I am very pleased to introduce Jessie Stolark, Executive Director of the Carbon Capture Coalition, who will be moderating this discussion. So, Jessie, I will hand it over to you with a brief note that I think I've seen a few hands raised, and just want to clarify for folks in the audience that hopefully we will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end for both our upcoming panel and both of our report authors. All right, back to you, Jessie.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. And thank you to Ryan and Sangeet for that overview of the report. So as Emma mentioned, I'm Jessie. I'm going to moderate a panel with our two esteemed speakers who are definitely experts on this topic, and just a little bit of framing for kind of our part two of this conversation. From our perspective, this comes at a critical moment when electricity demand is running up against efforts to continue reducing emissions, as well as upgrade the grid and ensure that domestic electricity supplies remain reliable and affordable. So with this atlas as a backdrop, I'm pleased to introduce Doug Vine, who is the Director of Energy Analysis at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and Alex Dewar, Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group. So as Emma mentioned, we'll discuss the broader context surrounding the report, including market signals for these technologies and the policies needed to support them at scale. Both C2ES and Boston Consulting Group are also doing really interesting work in this area. So I'm also sure that Alex and Doug will have some great perspectives on this emerging opportunity. So Doug, Alex, and I want to frame this up and get your perspectives on the report's findings on where we see carbon capture and storage and natural gas power as most viable, and how that's aligning, or maybe not aligning, with what you're seeing develop in the market over the next few years. And I'll start with the first person I see on the screen, which is Doug. So Doug, take it away.
Thanks, Jessie. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, looking forward to the discussion, looking forward to talking about the new screening tool we have for facilitating additional pathways for clean, firm electricity and meeting our climate goals. As Jessie said, I'm Doug Vine. I'm the Director of Energy Analysis. I lead the energy research and analysis work at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, or C2ES. My background is in engineering, and my career has been shaped by a focus on how we transition our massive, complex energy systems toward a lower carbon future. For those of you that are not familiar with C2ES, we were founded in 1998 as the Pew Center on Global Climate Change and became formally known as C2ES in late 2011. We're an independent, nonpartisan think tank. We work with a range of stakeholders, including large companies, policymakers, and at the community level as well, on durable, pragmatic, bipartisan policies. So C2S actually, we've been clear-eyed about the fact that achieving a net zero future is a massive challenge that requires a technology-inclusive approach, and that carbon capture isn't just one of many options. It's actually a fundamental pillar of any serious decarbonization strategy. And in 2011, before I was with C2ES by a year or so, C2ES and the Great Plains Institute founded the National Enhanced Oil Recovery Initiative, or NEORI, which was the predecessor to today's Carbon Capture Coalition. And at the time, it was quite revolutionary. We brought together a coalition of unlikely participants from the environmental community, state officials, labor unions, and folks in the oil and gas and fossil fuel production sectors. The groups didn't always agree on everything, but they agreed on the necessity of carbon capture. And by bridging those divides, with their expert analysis, had helped to further develop the Section 45Q tax credit. And that policy change basically shifted the economic landscape turning carbon capture from a niche concept into something that was a lot more commercially viable. So pivoting now into this this Atlas, congratulations on this project. It's very much in alignment with a couple of pieces of research that we're currently doing right now. So really happy to have this screening tool there, and I think it is a very powerful tool that's going to provide additional momentum for CCS and help drive additional power sector emissions even lower. I think the Atlas is we saw the data inputs. It's an extremely rigorous data-driven roadmap. It identifies the strategic intersections where the power generation, geological storage, and infrastructure all come together, or they all align to make the biggest impact. It's not just, theorizing about what's possible. It's showing directly what are the most viable opportunities that exist right now across a range of really important criteria that project developers need to have access to. And I just quickly wanted to pick up on the data center co-location opportunity scenario in particular, because I think that that's really important. And C2S is doing a bunch of research in this area as well. We think that data centers are a really powerful economic driver here. They're creating a demand pull for clean, firm power, which is not the cheapest option that we have out there, but it's an important option. We've seen a lot of project announcements out there, and the Atlas highlights some of these announcements. They're coming from the hyperscalers and from oil and gas companies that are developing these natural gas plus CCS projects. And I think the key point really is that implementing these projects, understanding the community needs, where the projects are located, developing the supply chains, building the workforce, learning by doing, all of this is really going to help bring the costs down for future projects and accelerate the adoption of CCS technologies in the power sector and beyond. That demand pull, coupled with what the report identifies as the most suitable locations in West Texas, Oklahoma, South Texas, along the Gulf Coast, and into the Midwest as well. These are the flashing beacons of where we should be devoting our attention.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug, and thanks for the history lesson on the coalition and our relationship with C2S. You guys are great partners, so appreciate that. Alex, I'd like to turn to you. Lots of great fodder from just what Doug raised, and maybe I'll build in what I asked Doug, which is, Doug had highlighted kind of the data center angles. Is that where you see the opportunity over the next few years, or anything else you'd like to add there, kind of on where you see this going?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. And I think a real pleasure to join you all and participate in the panel today. Building on the release of the Atlas, really exciting work on this, and groundbreaking as ever, as I expect from this group, of course. But I'm Alex Dewar. I'm a managing director and partner at the BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, based in Washington D.C., leading our work overall in CCUS and CDR. And coming from the consultant perspective here, I work closely with my clients across the ecosystem. This includes the technology and OEM developers and providers, asset developers, many of our large energy, both oil and gas and power and utility clients, as well as industrials and investors as well. So, really looking at that full ecosystem, I'd just offer a couple builds on it. Build one would be very much aligned, Doug, with what you're saying, that the data center opportunity here is paramount right now. Of course, for CCS, but even more specifically within applications in power, that really is where the demand signal is coming from, both on the speed and on the carbon intensity, or at least the willingness to pay for a lower carbon intensity, right? Both the clean and the firm component. And I exactly, Doug, as you said, the Atlas highlights, I think some really critical regions here where there is strong overlap with data center development. And if you put the sort of ISO RTO power market lens on it, that is certainly MISO, ERCOT, and SPP come out, front and center. I think we also see, the opportunities across the Western Interconnect or WEC overall, which does, the Atlas highlights a few opportunities there. Maybe the one challenge, of course, for CCS and gas power development is PJM, and it doesn't show up as clearly in the Atlas. We do think there's pockets, notably in Ohio, where you're seeing substantial gas power build, and there are some opportunities there. But of course, PJM is just going to be harder, right? The geology is not as conducive overall, which the Atlas highlights. But that leads me to my second point, which is second build, which is that there's never a perfect solution for CCS deployment. And those of us that work in the sector know, advancing a CCS project requires tremendous orchestration across different partners on the development side, from the policy and regulatory side, the supply chain, the investment or financial, the orchestration to advance a project is tremendously complicated, and never, at least I haven't found in my career working on this, found the perfect combination or the perfect site that's set up. There's always hard work to do. And I think that's another really important use of the Atlas here, or one where I hope folks take away from this is that there are of course going to be regions that are more or less advantaged, but there's going to be hard work around any of those opportunities that are building, and being focused right from the outset on what the core challenges are and what is needed or what the options are to overcome those challenges is really critical. In some cases, that may be policy or regulatory support to enable and advance specific projects. It may be integrating partners early on from, say, the transport perspective or from the natural gas supply perspective. There's going to be puts and takes across any given project. And so I think while, of course, we rightfully so should focus on the opportunities here, embedded within this analysis is also that view of what are the challenges. And the earlier the thinking can be done around overcoming those challenges, the better the chance of success.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And great flag on PJM. That's really interesting. We will definitely get into challenges. I feel like in the CCS world, we're gluttons for punishment on that. But I'd like to go back to kind of, Doug mentioned this as a central pillar for decarbonization. I mean, and we, Great Plains Institute, we recognize that it's a solution set, right? And that we need all of the technologies on the table. But can you talk a little bit more about how natural gas paired with CCS compares with some of these other clean firm technologies in terms of the cost, the timelines, and the scalability? I don't know, Alex, if you want to go first on that one.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, and look, we just put out a report recently on the carbon capture opportunity around data center power development. And as ever, it's so important to look at a multitude of different factors here that are going to shape technology selection and deployment. Its cost is first and foremost in many cases. But so too is speed. And actually, if you take the data center power development opportunity and talk to any of the hyperscalers who ultimately are the ones at this point that are backing the higher bill, right? Ultimately to pay the difference for the clean firm, not just the firm capacity. Speed is of paramount importance here, but so too factors like scalability for more novel technologies. How quickly can we foresee a scalable model moving from again smaller scale initial projects to then grow from there? And then across all of this too, there's questions or challenges around what are the proof points and the confidence of advancing different technologies overall. So, it's a complicated landscape that you see across different, competing technologies, and kind of in this broader clean firm bucket now, including nuclear SMR, geothermal, long duration storage. You can even bucket, forms of demand response, into that overall. And when we've looked at it and we've assessed this for a number of clients, when both on the supply side and the buyer side, I think the where we keep coming back to every time is that gas, is of course getting built for a reason. It's quick, it's firm, it's cost competitive, and then when you add and complement that with carbon capture, then across those dimensions, it does compare favorably against the range of other technologies. And I would say there's a number of power buyers, a number of the hyperscalers that are coming to that conclusion as well, and we're seeing more and more traction in the market. I think few projects announced necessarily yet publicly, but a lot in the works. And I know folks are on this call that are actively engaged in advancing a number of those projects. Overall. So again, it's cost matters here. And ultimately, while adding carbon capture is expensive, it is relatively competitive against other firm low carbon options. And then when you assess those broader criteria as well, again, time and again, we kind of come back to it as kind of the practical, viable, scalable option here for ultimately providing the clean in the clean firm power.
Great, thank you. Doug, was there anything you wanted to add there?
Sure. I think Alex really laid that out well. I'd compare the same technologies, basically advanced nuclear, enhanced geothermal, and natural gas with CCS. And if you're just looking at or comparing on cost, there's probably not a lot of data on the enhanced geothermal systems, but looking at EIA estimates at least, I think it's kind of a dead heat in terms of like on price alone. It could be anywhere from 70 to $100 a megawatt hour for these technologies. Um, so I think you do have to start looking at timelines um, you know and where you can actually put these things as well too. I know you didn't give that a score, but I think that's something that comes out of the Atlas as well, as maybe there are a few places in the country where we will have challenges with clean firm and natural gas plus CCS. So I think nuclear wins on the availability. You can put them anywhere. We're going to build one on the moon. The new ones don't need or have the same tide of water that the current fleet does. So that you can put a new advanced reactor anywhere. And then also they're extremely the most energy dense of all of them. So in terms of scalability, you can get a lot of power from a very small location. So that's great. But on the timeline front, that's where things start to come a little bit undone for nuclear. There's a bunch of regulatory hurdles they have to go through. There's precision or maybe a higher level of engineering and construction that has to happen. So the timelines are going to be significantly longer than I think for the other two technologies for enhanced geothermal and natural gas. And then with natural gas having the shortest time frame, probably as particularly for retrofit projects. So I think, and bringing in some of the stuff that Sangeet was talking about too in the initial presentation about how we have all this natural gas capacity out there, and that's really a huge opportunity on the affordability front to kind of capitalize on all this infrastructure investment that we have in terms of the pipelines and the natural gas combined cycle plants that are out there that are perfectly good, that can have a long lifespan with retrofitted carbon capture and be contributing to lower cost power and clean firm power, which is really important for grid reliability.
Great, thank you. I'll just flag again, folks listening in, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the question Q&A box or raise your hand. We will leave some time at the end for questions. So get those questions in. So let's shift. We've kind of already talked about some of the challenges. Number one, I think top of mind being cost. It is, of course, more expensive to have abated gas through CCS versus unabated gas. And we talked very little or at a high level about, the 45Q tax credit, which is, the primary policy mechanism here in the US. And we also know that there is that cost gap. So let's dig in maybe a little bit more on some of the other challenges. Doug, you mentioned regulatory hurdles. I think another one we could talk about is public acceptance. Are there other things maybe we're not thinking about, or did you want to dig deeper on some of those topics?
Sure, sure. Yeah, public acceptance has been challenging. There's a lot of challenges, and that's why there is a carbon capture coalition. You have to work through all these different facets of deploying these power plants. So I guess I would just hit on three things. I think the public acceptance ones, it feels um, like we're in a time of protest, general protest, and I think the data centers there's a lot of resistance to building things, so we're stuck with this. Not only NIMBY, but the banana effect about building absolutely nothing anywhere near anything, I think is what that stands for. So we're seeing a lot of pushback. And I think in carbon capture area as well with the carbon dioxide pipelines as well, there's been a lot of challenges there. Um, and a long running issue from the environmental left is that there's the perception that CCS is a lifeline for fossil fuels, and they say it's that CCS is just a tool to extend the life of fossil fuels rather than transition away from them. That's a tough challenge. We're very diametrically opposed there. I think fossil fuels can be part of the climate solution. We need to do the right things. We need to think about methane leaks across the natural gas value chain that gives us the social license to operate and just be good stewards of monitoring geologic storage and monitoring all of our natural gas production sites and our power plants. And then there's also issues around environmental justice as well. So there's skepticism about adding new infrastructure and potentially new sources of environmental harm. So those have been challenges. I think the regulatory and permitting challenges are that it's not unique to natural gas or new power plants and CCS power plants. That's just going to be out there. That's a big focus of ours this year. We're hoping that we can affect some kind of change and get some kind of comprehensive permitting reform by the end of this year. We'll see what happens there. It's touch and go whether or not that actually comes together and gets developed. So I think in the interest of time, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Doug. I don't know, Alex, if there was anything else you wanted to touch on or dig deeper in on some of those challenges that Doug mentioned.
Yeah, and where we come from at BCG is very much supporting our clients on the business problems and challenges of it, and CCS, like any other new technology, we're seeing is requiring new types of business models, commercial structures, and financing models as well to support that. And unfortunately, there's just inevitably, I think, a learn by doing type of model in that. But there are some good, really valuable lessons so far that I would say, those in the development space can deploy overall. I think number one is just on the business model piece of this that there are more creative ways, there are more dynamic ways, right, to set up your business around it than others. I think some of the lessons I've had from some of my clients is say a traditional sort of project or product kind of concept development model is not necessarily fit for purpose here. That the integration of and alignment of different technologies, of different partnership structures across capture, power generation, transport, and storage, as well as, of course, critically on the EPC side, that we're now exploring a lot of different types of constructs in that, and deviating quite substantially maybe from the traditional technology deployment or capital project structuring model, at least that many of my clients have developed there. So that is certainly one right that many have encountered, and I think there's some kind of emerging wins and success factors, right, of changing your approach around the business model and the project structuring or product structuring on that. I think second is on the commercial side, this question of how to actually access the value around the kind of clean portion of the firm clean, the environmental attributes overall on that is a critical piece. I think, again, there's been some great thinking and advancement around what specific EAC structures could look like around how to demonstrate the value in say, in a locational marginal emissions analysis basis for those in the kind of so-called emissions first camp on the buyer side. But we're still early days in that, right? And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done to demonstrate and document and validate what that low carbon intensity value is, and ultimately to pass that through the value chain. Obviously, hyperscalers right now are kind of backing the low carbon premium in a lot of ways, but that's only sustainable so far, right? There's a larger downstream value chain, if you will, of hyperscaler customers where we don't yet even have the metrics, right, to document what is the carbon intensity of compute, and what is the complementary role of CCS with renewable power and battery storage to demonstrate how it really fits into the system. So, much more work needs to be done there to really provide the value proof on this. And then third, I would say beyond all of that is the kind of the wider financing models and ways to deploy capital in this. I think there have been struggles in the past with understanding what is the risk return profile and how do you actually fit a kind of investment return or return sort of expectation within this space. Again, kind of the bookends here being a kind of high risk, high return, spend a lot of money on DevEx and hope you get high return projects in the back end, versus I think others have entered this with very much an infrastructure ratable return type of mindset. The reality is, it's somewhere in between, and there's different sort of financial structures and different, of course, investment partners you can integrate in and around a project to strike the right balance in there. And again, some learnings in that, but still some distance to go, right? So I kind of end up coming back to those three business challenges with most of my clients, and I think fortunately there have been some good learnings and evolution. And this is a adaptable and dynamic sector with a lot of entrepreneurial and creative participants in it that are figuring this out. But there's still more, of course, more work to do on those dimensions.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Great perspectives. Thank you both. I have, of course, always lots more questions, but I am going to turn it to Emma to see if there's any audience questions that we can answer, or that any of the other panelists can answer. So back to you, Emma.
Thanks, Jessie. And thank you, Alex, Doug, for a really helpful discussion to build on the analysis and Atlas overview we heard earlier. For folks in the audience, feel free to direct questions to Ryan and Sangeet on the Atlas, or to Alex and Doug on any of those takeaways or policy market ideas that they shared during the moderated discussion. I think to kick us off here, Jeff Lee, I see you've had your hand raised for a very long time, and so I want to make sure you are allowed to ask your question. I just unmuted you.
Sorry, that was a mistake. I didn't realize my hand was up.
Oh, no worries, Jeff.
Question.
Yeah,
For others in the audience, happy to
maybe
take any questions.
I was going to say, Emma, while we're waiting for any remaining questions to come in, I can ask my final question maybe. So Doug and Alex and even Ryan and Sangeet, feel free to jump in if you have thoughts. If you could just kind of quickly summarize for us what's needed next to drive forward this technology, kind of like what your highest priority would be we talked a lot of opportunities today. We also talked about a lot of challenges. But from your vantage point, kind of what do we need to advance in the next year or so to really move this forward?
So I could just go quickly here. We don't have a lot of the EPA in the last administration, made some efforts to try to put a little bit of a stick into power sector decarbonization. We really don't have that right now, but what we do have, I would just reiterate, we've talked a lot about it, is this great opportunity with data centers, and maybe that's the pull and the push, or the momentum that we need to finally get some of these power sector carbon capture projects in place and move things down the cost curve, and I think the Atlas is really, it's directing where those efforts should be happening. There's a wide space there. And some of them we have seen project announcements, which I alluded to in my opening remarks. So I think we really collectively just need to hop on that bandwagon and hope that demand is going to propel these important technologies forward.
Yeah, to build on that, Doug, I would just say value. Clearly documenting the value and articulating that of carbon capture and gas. What is the scale of emissions abatement that's viable here? What is the speed and the timeline, right? Of course, those, in the climate space, we know climate is greenhouse gas accounting is both a stock problem, a flows problem, but a stocks problem at the end of the day. And every ton of emissions avoided here, is helpful, right? And so the pace, and then also the compatibility with other technologies. Of course, CCS, gas and CCS is advantage, but there's a role for really for all of the above on low carbon technologies, and I think articulating that complementary nature. So more work is needed on that, ultimately to build the confidence of hyperscalers and of their customers. At the end of the day, this needs to be, whatever that premium above 45Q is to the ultimate cost here, needs to be sort of the value or the return on that investment needs to be clear. And I think there's more work, overall to be done. Many of us are doing it, but let's all double down efforts to really be clear on that, and make sure that there's as strong of a case as possible.
Thanks, Alex. Definitely agree with you on the more work needed to be done. I'm seeing another question in the chat from Pratik Prabhu saying that AI-driven data centers are created unprecedented short-term power demand, but technological advances are expected to significantly improve efficiency and reduce long-term power intensity. In this context, how should carbon capture be positioned to remain economically viable, scalable, and relevant as power demand profiles evolve? Happy to direct that to whomever.
Alex, you go
Ryan?
first. I see you come off
Yeah.
mute, and then I can answer. I can also add something after that.
No, go ahead, Ryan. Yeah, I'd love your views on it. Yeah.
I guess first, I think that's an excellent question, Pratik, on something that goes probably much more beyond even just natural gas or carbon capture too. It's, how do grid operators and power producers balance what is both, because it's not only just that side of like, are they going to improve efficiency, and how is that going to change their load demand over time, but also what projects are going to move forward. And I think all that kind of comes down into all of this. Like, it's an all hands on deck on those that are part of that planning process to ensure that they are developing projects that can meet the demand that they expect, but also be scalable and variable to those. I think one thing I would note, I think, ultimately this question, I think, comes down to individual. I'm blanking on the name, but the plans that power producers develop to meet the demand over time, individual of those, but then also individual plants. But I do think, in addition to maybe the new build and the load growth that we're going to have to meet, this is kind of where potentially some of the existing demand and installing retrofits or opportunities for retrofit with carbon capture really comes into play too, because even maybe regardless of what occurs as far as load growth goes, we still have 40% of our current supply coming from natural gas power that it's operating unabated currently. And so identifying where we can be decarbonizing those as well, where that production and that generation is probably expected to continue even more so than maybe whatever projected demand goes, I think is part of the process. And maybe identifying, where that can be scaled best to meet those cost needs is kind of one of the other challenges. Alex?
Yeah, Ryan. No, I really like your multifaceted response on that, and I think at the end of the day, there is still uncertainty around as much gas as we're building, right, and is forthcoming in the U.S. There still is uncertainty around where does this ultimately go? What changes on the load profiles? How do we factor in, Doug, to your point, future climate policies, and ultimately liabilities around the greenhouse gas emissions footprint, a number of factors, but kind of one point I've come back to consistently is, okay, what is one way to ultimately de-risk that investment in gas power right now? It's to adopt CCS or have a clear pathway for scaling CCS at that site, not just being CCS ready, right? But starting with at least some small share of capture in it, and that's your insurance policy, right? For ensuring that asset is a 20-year plus, 30-year plus type of asset, right? It will be resilient under any case. So that's kind of one argument I've kind of deployed overall. Maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not, right? Around carbon capture as sort of your insurance policy.
Thanks, Alex, for wrapping us up with that great answer. I know we're a bit over time here, so just want to thank Jessie, Alex, Doug for the wonderful moderated discussion today, and then Ryan and Sangeet for walking us through the Atlas and your analysis. We appreciate everyone who joined us today and the thoughtful engagement from this group. And if you have any follow-up questions or would like to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to us. In the next week or so, we'll be sharing the recording, links to the Atlas and the slide deck and any other materials related to today's webinar. So thank you again for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.